Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for our event, Circular Economy and the Fashion Industry. What can we do to make a difference? So my name is Lara Paul-Martel, and I'm the president of the LSESU Circular Economy Society. It's a fairly new or young society. We just got founded last term. And yeah, we're basically trying to raise more awareness around the circular economy by organizing events for students and sometimes beyond, and to also kind of create a network between the students and practitioners in the field, and just simply show how diverse the circular economy is and that it's kind of something for everyone. And yeah, we hope to really inspire students to look more deeply into the field. And so one very exciting thing about this event is that it's our first public event. So our previous events have only been for students, and this one is open for the public. So before I introduce our speaker today, Cynthia Ko, I'm just going to hand it over to our chair, Dr. Thomas Smith, real quick. Just if you could just say a couple of words. I know you just introduced yourself a little bit, but just so we know who you are.
Sure, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Environment. I'm the departmental tutor as well, so responsible for all of the undergraduate programs in the department. But specifically, I'm the director of the BSc Environment and Development and the BSc in Environmental Policy with Economics. And sustainable development is a core theme to both of those programs. So I'm really pleased to have been invited to help you out with chairing this event today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here today. Okay, so today we're going to listen to a talk by Cynthia Ko, and after the talk you will have the opportunity to ask your questions to her, and for this Q&A session in the second half of the event, you can feel free to just type your questions into the chat, and then we will try to make sure to answer all your questions. But now, to introduce our speaker, a warm welcome to Cynthia. Cynthia has a very diverse background, combining behavioral science, design, and research with a passion for the planet and its people. And in addition to her master's in design for interaction from the TU Delft in the Netherlands, she also holds a postgraduate diploma in behavior change from UCL in London. And for her master thesis, she combined both fields when she explored behavioral implications of sustainable service design in the fashion industry, utilizing an interdisciplinary approach to meet business, consumer, and environmental needs. So very much meeting the topic of today's event. And now she's the campaigns coordinator at Slow Fashion Movement, a global initiative of people who have pledged to live a sustainable fashion lifestyle. And she's also the co-founder of Slow Fashion Movement UK to mobilize change on a more local level. And yeah, so I'm a psychology or behavioral science student myself. So I'm particularly excited that Cynthia will also speak about what we as consumers can do to make our fashion consumption more circular today. So yeah, Cynthia, I just hand it over to you.
Thank you, Laura, for the introduction. So as Laura already pointed out, I am not some scientist. I am also not from the fashion industry itself, but I do come at it from a more behavioral angle, but also the business side of things because of my thesis in service design. So today's presentation will be about circular economy and the fashion industry. And I'll be drawing from a few sources. So it's about the ongoing knowledge that I've built as part of the slow fashion movement, but also my thesis that Laura just talked about. But before I dive into the details, I just want to make sure we know what we're talking about in this webinar, as in what's a circular economy for those who don't know. So currently the fast fashion industry mostly operates on a linear economy. So this looks like a take, make, and dispose model. If you think about maybe the jeans that you're wearing right now, or not, because it's pandemic and we're not wearing jeans anymore while we're on meetings, so I'm not judging you, but just imagine that you're wearing a pair of jeans right now. And to produce a pair of jeans, we need to take some materials from nature. Usually that's cotton from China or India. Then we go and make fabric out of that cotton, most likely somewhere in India or Bangladesh. And then it takes a while before it arrives in the shops and then on your lap in the UK or wherever you might be. And once we're done wearing the jeans, we dispose of them. And that's how a linear economy looks like. And how a circular economy would look like in a very, very simplified way. In an ideal world driven by the circular economy, these jeans would be reused in some way, or its materials would be recycled. So this means that there is no disposal at all in the whole supply chain. And your jeans are produced in a sustainable way. And like I said, this is a very simplified model, and we'll go into the details later. But before I do so, let's look at some of the facts together. So Laura, can you launch the first quiz? If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see one quiz question pop up. So the first question is, how much % of clothing do you think gets recycled globally? I can see a lot of people voting. Many people seem to think, let's see, I'll wait for a bit because I don't want to bias your choices. Okay, I think most of us have voted. Most of you have said 10%, which I kind of understand because, you know, the climate crisis is really scary at the moment. But actually, it's better than that. It's 20%, according to a study by EcoChain in 2019. But this, even though this percentage is higher than you anticipated, this actually still has to improve. In the UK alone, 140 million pounds worth of clothing goes to landfill every year, according to a study by REP in 2017. And globally, 500 billion US dollars is lost every year due to clothing, underutilization, and the lack of recycling. So now that we're speaking about underutilization, which means basically how much you use your clothes that you already own, I want to go to the next question, if you could launch that. Or I'm launching it actually, which is, how much % of clothing do you think is left unused in a wardrobe? You can start voting now. Okay, so most of you seem to be thinking it's 60%. I'll get to the answer after the third question. So if you could do the honors, Lara. How many collections do you think fashion companies release every year on average? Okay, so most of you think 8. Thank you so much for joining into the quiz. And I will reveal the answer of the last 2 questions now, because it seems like most of us here are quite scared of climate change because the numbers are quite high. Actually, the actual number of the percentage of wardrobe that's left unused in our wardrobe is 30%. So it's a little bit less. And as for the collections that are released each year, it's 5 collections a year. But this is all going to increase. So back in 2000s, most clothing companies only released 2 collections a year. And then just 11 years later, it was 5 collections a year, with some fast fashion companies such as Zara releasing 24 collections a year. As you can see in this graph already, you know, all of these sales are increasing per year. And then when you look at this line, which is the clothing utilization line, that seems to keep decreasing, even though sales are increasing. So you might wonder what's happening there. And also, how does that make you feel? because many people are angry about this, and they express this on the streets with big banners saying we should do something about climate change. I took these pictures when I attended the climate strike back in 2019. But to be very honest, I only attend these kind of events maybe once a year, and even less now due to the pandemic. Because most of us don't really look like this in our everyday life. Trying to be sustainable can look like this, but it can also be very confusing. Many people feel hopeless as well. So what I'm trying to say is that caring about sustainability doesn't always have to look like this. Because being a sustainability advocate is also about having a heart for humanity. And what I mean with that is that we have to appreciate that fashion can be a very powerful tool for self-expression. We have come a long way from tight formal corsets to more colorful, diverse types of fashion, or maybe something more punk-like if you look at 20 years back. And when I say we should have a heart for this, it doesn't mean we should blindly glamorize all of this. It's about recognizing the harm that fashion can do, was also accounting for our human needs. And in an ideal world, the circular economy would help us get there. But truth be told, there's still a long way to go. So the fashion industry is one of the most polluting industries. And when you just look at the greenhouse gas emissions, most people think that it's transport that's causing so many greenhouse gas emissions. But actually, when you look at the supply chain, it's just 1%. And the biggest polluter is actually in the dyeing and finishing phase because it takes a lot of energy to dye certain fabrics. But also, the use phase causes a lot of greenhouse gas emissions as well. And this is due to behaviors such as washing behaviors, but also drying behaviors, using tumble dryers where you could just, dry your clothes out in the air. And then on top of all of that, it's not just about greenhouse gases. It's also about the water usage that happens throughout the supply chain, the chemical usage, and the waste creation that happens. And all of this sounds very daunting. I'm very aware of that. And I'm here to say that it will only get worse in some way because it's projected that all of these factors, except for the chemical usage, because they can't really project that, but the other three factors, they will only increase in the next 9 years. And many people feel very paralyzed because they see this problem and it's just so huge. And even those who do feel motivated to do something about it also just feel like some drop in the ocean, especially my generation, this constant anxiety around what will happen when the world will keep rising in its temperature. I just came off of a meeting this afternoon, actually, where we were talking about whether anything we do is useful at all because the world is changing and everything, even if we take account of sustainable materials, what then happens to the garment workers? What happens to climate refugees? And these are the kind of things that keep me awake at night. And it's so anxiety triggering, and changing our behaviors feels like, just us doing something and then wondering whether that would change anything. But at the same time, some days we also think we can just save the world anyway. And and I think I came to this stage because I'm always surrounded by people who make me feel like I'm not alone in this. So imagine if you are one drop amongst more than 10,000 drops in the ocean. At Slow Fashion Movement, we like to say that together we can make waves of change happen. And that's what we did. So last year, we ran our third annual Slow Fashion Season campaign, where we collectively urged people to stop buying clothes for 3 months. So what started as a group of friends doing a pledge together 3 years ago turned into over 11,000 people standing up against fast fashion through their individual actions by doing it together. And some of us still held on to our banners, as you can see in this picture, but many of us became sustainability advocates through our actions behind the scenes. And then you might start to think, okay, well, not buying anything new for 3 months, what does that even do for the climate? Well, actually, it does a lot, because a study by REP found that if you use your clothes that you already own for longer than 3 months than usual, it will reduce the carbon footprint by 8%. It will reduce water usage by 10%, and it will reduce waste creation by 9%. Do this times 10,000. I'm not going to do the math for you, but it's a huge impact. And this inspired us to refocus our collective strategy to grow from an annual campaign called the Slow Fashion Season to a permanent movement called Slow Fashion Movement. And through global collective change, we really believe that we could drive local change. And within just 5 months, since November last year, we created 16 local groups across the world where we're all trying to amplify this global change again. So I think we're doing this because we believe in grassroots change. We know that in order to mobilize people, you have to start from the bottom. But at the same time, you also need to have this top-down global perspective. And if we want to save the planet, this is what we have to do. Manufacturers have to stop producing from scratch, and consumers have to stop purchasing new clothes. But then when I'm saying this, I'm also thinking, hold on a minute. Where does this whole thing about having a heart for humanity fit into this? Because don't we all have needs to buy clothes against the cold weather, or to brighten our day with a nice sunny dress? Or even at a business level, don't we want to make money so our employees can live a comfortable life? So before giving you all the answers and all the secrets of the circular economy, I would like to invite you to think about what you think we can do as a consumer, because there's so much more we can do than just not buying anything. And I'd be curious to see what you think. So if you can go to menti.com and then fill in this code, you will end up in an environment where you can give your answers so we can create a word cloud together. And feel free to give me a shout if you're confused about where to go or it's not working for you. Great, I'm already seeing things pop up. So you should be seeing this pop up live. I see upcycling clothes. So for those who are not aware of the terminology, it means that you use the materials of your clothes in a different way so that you're still utilizing your clothes. Refurbish, which is kind of the same thing almost. Shop secondhand. Yes, for sure, secondhand is different from buying something new, and that does help the circular economy. Okay, amazing. Thrifting is also kind of the same as buying secondhand. Donating clothing, that's also amazing because then we keep things in the loop. Wash less, yes, yes. Amazing, I love this. I'm just going to wait and see because it keeps changing. Buying eco-conscious brands, yes, that's another thing we can do. Dry in the sun, for sure. Vegan products, for sure as well. Let's see if there's more popping up. Stop impulse buying, yes, that's also part of it. Renting clothes, and that's one of the circular business models I will be talking about later. Learn to fix clothes. I don't know about you, but during the pandemic, I've picked up some sewing skills because of the pandemic. So I'm quite proud of being able to sew a little button on my shirt. Love what you have. That's definitely a part of it as well. That's kind of about putting the human at the center of the circular economy as well, putting your heart at humanity. And I think we've stopped adding things. I love this word cloud. I'm just going to screenshot this. And I hope that kind of made you feel a little bit less pessimistic from the statistics and just things. I'll ask Lara to share the screenshot with you later, but let's just go back to the presentation for now. So as with all difficult things in life, there's never one good or wrong answer. It all depends. And in this case, I think it depends on your behavior. Okay, I skipped a slide there. Sorry about that. But I'm going to just freestyle that. Okay, so when I did an interview with a bunch of women between the age of 30 and 40, I found out that the way we use our clothes depends on different values. So you can have some physical values, which means you might want to treat your clothes a certain way because you want to protect yourself against the weather, or because you think your clothes have some sort of material value that you can resell them again. Or there's some sort of psychological value connected to your clothes. So you might think that some clothes are pretty and that's why you take better care of them. Or you use your clothes for the purpose of social leveling. And that means that when you go to a funeral, for example, you don't end up wearing something that's bright red because it's socially inappropriate in some cultures. And that's why you might end up buying another more formal black dress. So everything we do, there's so many things we can do, but it all also depends on our needs and what's reasonable in our capabilities. And that's just from a consumer perspective. So what then happens from the planet's perspective? How do we help the planet? And also, how do we take care of business needs as well? So that's where the circular economy would hopefully lead us to what's called a zero waste life. And what that means is that we use the circular economy to try and use our materials as long as we can and feed them back into the supply chain whenever we can. And the whole model actually looks like this. So like I said, the previous one was quite simplified. And this one looks a little bit scary, but it's basically about two loops. So the first loop on the left, it's about biological materials that you take from nature and hopefully put back into nature again. And then the loop on the right side, it's about technical materials. So these materials kind of cascade through different stages in the supply chain, from manufacturers to clothing brands to the user or consumer. And then with this, different circular initiatives are possible. So in an ideal world, consumers then wouldn't have to think too much about what to buy because anything that's produced should be inherently sustainable if they apply these principles of the circular economy. The responsibility then lies in the fashion industry and not the consumers. But of course, the industry wants to make money. And how does the industry make money? Well, hopefully by keeping their customers happy. And here are just some of the most popular circular business models. I'll just go through them one by one. So the first one is called the rental subscription model. Some of you already mentioned that one in the little word cloud exercise that we just did. And what that means is that customers pay a monthly fee to have a fixed number of garments on loan at any one time, and they can frequently change the outfit through this subscription model. And what this means for the consumer is that they can try out different styles without owning all of these new clothes all the time. And then from a business perspective, it means that we can have long-term customer relationships. There's also a short-term version of that which means it's much more about one-off kind of occasions when you want to rent a wedding dress, for example, or your Halloween outfit. There's also the business model that is based on the sale of highly durable clothes. So what that means for the consumer is that they will own clothes that last longer. And for business, that means that they, again, have long-term customer relationships because your customers might come back to you for repairs and such things. And then there's resale, which is the whole second-hand market where consumers can then access kind of premium material clothes for cheaper prices. And for the business, it means that they might sell one same product multiple times. And well, how this looks like, this is yet another model, but many circular business models are based on the 7 R's of zero waste living. The first 3 are refusing to make or buy new clothes, rethinking the way we use our materials and systems, and reducing our consumption and waste. This is about the clever use of materials. And then the next batch of actions that you can take is to reuse your clothes, whether it's as one user or multiple uses, or repurpose our products. And that means that you might not be able to wear your skirt anymore, but maybe you can use your skirt as a cleaning cloth. This is also known as product life extension. So when we talk about reuse and repurpose, we design for a way that the clothes are used in a very long time. And this includes practices such as repairing your clothes or also taking better care of your clothes. And if all else fails, you go to the bottom of the pyramid where you recycle your materials or we use them for recovery. So in other words, we make useful use of materials. Rather than sending them to landfill for no reason and then burning them, we design our clothes in a way so we can take apart its fabric to be used for other clothes, or we make sure that the materials are biodegradable, which means they go back into nature. Now, just to give you a few examples. So My Jeans, it's a jeans company, and they have multiple business models. One of them is the more conventional one, where you can buy a pair of jeans the way you usually would and then keep them until you dispose of them. Or you lease My Jeans for about 750 euros per month. And after 1 year, your needs may change. So then you have three options. You can either keep it for another year, or you keep it and wear it as long as you like, or you return the jeans to mud and then you receive a voucher for a new purchase. And the last option raises some question marks because fundamentally that means people are still urged to buy something new after 1 year already, even though the old jeans will be reused properly because My Jeans is taking them apart properly and recycling them or reselling them. At the same time, it really makes business sense. But then what else can we do to make business sense? Here's another example of mine. This is based on my thesis, actually. And rather than telling you how it works, I'm just going to share another screen now. So just give me 1 second to share another screen. Okay, I think you can see a little preview now of an app. Feel free to nod if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is a prototype of something I made for King Louis during my thesis. It's an app which is basically a peer-to-peer styling platform. So the idea of it is that we encourage people to be very creative because the target group was a bunch of women between 30 and 40-year-olds who really regard their clothing as a part of their hobby. So we told them you can go into the wardrobe of your friends. You can help them revalue the clothes that they already own by mixing and matching new styles. You share these with your friends, maybe add a comment. And then hopefully your friend would be inspired to use the clothes that they already own in their wardrobe rather than going to buy something new because there's a fresh pair of eyes showing you how to use your wardrobe in a more creative way. And then for you as a friend, of course, you want to have something out of that as well. So you gain style points. And rather than using these style points for another purchase of clothing, I try to encourage them to use them for other things. So rethinking how clothing companies or brands can provide services that are not related to selling clothes all the time. So I actually advise them to employ a brand stylist where people can exchange their points to, talk with this brand stylist or to have paid partnerships with certain more sustainable products such as biological washing detergent, or even teach your customers how to repair through workshops by encouraging them to attend these workshops when they've accumulated enough style points. And another part of this app was to integrate a secondhand web shop. It's in Dutch, by the way, because it was for a Dutch market. But you'll just have to believe me that this is a secondhand web shop where you can just sell your clothes. And hopefully this also keeps clothing in a loop between users rather than giving it away to landfill. So that's just a little preview of that. So I'll go back to the presentation now. So the whole idea of this app was to look at the values of the users and then use these two sustainability strategies. So the peer-to-peer styling is about refusing and reducing consumption. And then the secondhand platform integration was about reusing the same piece of clothing by circulating it amongst multiple users. And the whole business model was based on rethinking the way we provide clothing services. And you might wonder, okay, so how did they then make money? I mean, I asked myself the whole time, do clothing companies have to make money by selling new clothes only? And if they do, how can we make it sustainable yet profitable? Now, one thing that some people don't always talk about when they're talking about the circular economy is that the circular economy is also about collaboration and capacity building. So the strength of this app was actually its network effect. By encouraging people to invite their peers into the app, you kind of create market expansion. So think about it like this: rather than selling 10 dresses to one customer, you could sell one dress to 10 customers each, right? And it's still the same amount of dresses, but it's sustainable from a consumer perspective, and you're still making the same amount of money. Or you can have paid partnerships through the style points, as I already said. So, but just a disclaimer, as you know, I am not an economist, so this app is still in development. It's hard to tell how much revenue this will generate, and what a business will always have different revenue models anyway. So in an ideal world, hopefully this will pay all the expenses of running a company, but I don't know if that will happen, but I remain hopeful. And I'm hopeful because I know that there are great examples out there, such as Patagonia. So they usually make very highly durable clothes using sustainable sources, but that's not the only thing they do. Actually, when you look at the whole pyramid, they cover the whole pyramid. So they're notorious for one of their campaigns that explicitly said, don't buy this jacket, as you can see here. So this helps consumers to refuse buying. Ironically, though, this made sales go up, but that's a discussion for maybe after the presentation. And then they also encourage people to reuse by designing the clothes in a very durable way. So offering repairs and making sure that people don't throw away something when it has a tear in it. They also do some repurposing by some initiatives such as turning fishing nets into hat prints. And then 65% of their line uses recycled materials, meaning they also cover the recycling part of the pyramid. And last but not least, they also do things in a very regenerative way. So that means that they cultivate fibers in a way that restores nature. So taking part in the circular economy as a business can happen in multiple ways. And brands do have a say in how they can affect the world. And it's unfair to put all of this responsibility on consumers. However, the success of circular business models, both financially and environmentally, relies on consumer behavior. So some models are most financially viable in the luxury sector only, as you can see in this little diagram. And also we have to watch out for something what they call moral licensing. And that's when consumers think they're doing something sustainable. So they do that one thing excessively until it's actually not sustainable anymore. So just to give you an example, in a rental subscription model, this translates into customers swapping out clothes multiple times within a month, which then defeats the sustainability purpose of the business model. Like if you want to be viable as a business and if you want to take care of the planet, ideally maybe a person would swap their clothes once a month or twice a month. But if people do it 10 times a month, then it becomes unsustainable again. So there's a fine balance to be struck. And yeah, having said all of this, you can probably already imagine that the circular economy is just very tricky. So consumers, brands, and policymakers, we're all responsible for change. And industry-wide change is already happening with key players such as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. In May, they will release this jeans redesign guidelines, which helps brands and manufacturers to produce jeans in a way that fits the circular economy. But what happens then with the people who produce our clothes? And what happens to the people who live near the factories where clothes are produced? Taking the example of jeans again, this is from a True Price of Jeans report by Impact Institute, and they measured how much a pair of jeans should actually cost. So the price that consumers pay for the jeans is not what it should be. There are social and environmental costs that don't appear on the price tags. This report highlighted that just in the cotton cultivation phase, there's already more than €8 needed to account for the social and environmental impact of jeans. And then as we move across the supply chain, you can see that the social impact gets worse. So that's the red little bar that you see here. So actually, jeans should get more and more expensive because the social circumstances are so bad across the supply chain. And then I wonder, so what does the circular economy do about this? There's another kind of circular shaped model that's trying to account for this, and it's called the donut model by Kate Raworth. It looks a little bit complicated, but what it seeks to do is to have this safe space between an ecological ceiling and a social foundation. So imagine standing in the safe zone, which is this light green zone. You know, you're in the middle of the donut, so to speak. And when you're in the middle of the donut and the ecological ceiling keeps going down because of ecological pressures, it means that your donut space shrinks, right? But also when your social foundations keep lacking, when the social pressures keep going up, it means that the ground from underneath you will also go up. So in the end, you will just get squished in this donut. And well, then there's not much to live for. But so this is another model that people are already using in policy shaping. For example, last year, the city of Amsterdam released its sustainability strategy based on the donut model. And I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just highlighting this to show that there's more to sustainability than just the environmental part of it. And actually, the next campaign that we will be doing as Slow Fashion Movement will be about this, where we will take people on a journey and ask ourselves and the industry whether the denim industry can take responsibility for intersectional sustainability. And what that means is that we're looking at the whole supply chain throughout April, where we start with cotton cultivation, where we know that there's extensive water and chemical usage because of cotton. And then there's also forced labor in Uzbekistan and China. And as you move across the supply chain, there's even more underpaid forced labor, sexual violence against garment workers. The dyeing process is very controversial, especially in the jeans industry, because there's a lot of water used during the dyeing process to get that indigo color. There's a lot of water pollution as a result of this. And then that turns into health hazards because all of this polluted water goes into rivers where people live and drink from. And then, you know, during the production of the jeans, when people sew jeans together, it's the same case of underpaid labor, of sexual violence, of health hazards during finishing. So, you know, this vintage look that you have on jeans or the ripped jeans look, all of that is a lot of labor, a lot of manual labor. And the industry uses some practices such as stonewashing, which are very bad for the garment workers, actually, and it's not very safe. Then when, as a consumer, you purchase jeans, of course, you have a say in what happens to the planet. Also, the way you use it, as a lot of people already pointed out, you know, water and energy usage during the washing period decreases durability. And then last but not least, it's the disposal phase, you know, the waste creation, the lack of recycling. All of this has its loopholes from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective. And we hope we can take you on a journey in April with this global campaign, but not by just scaring you and paralyzing you with information. The campaign will be 4 weeks. The first 3 weeks will be based on interactive education, and we will be shaping a jeans guide together, actually. And on in the fourth week, it will be based on action. So what can we do together? And that will be a little bit of a surprise. So without spoiling too much, if you are interested in Slow Fashion Movement, feel free to look us up on Instagram mainly. If you want to volunteer for any of our local teams, feel free to email us. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you, Cynthia. That was great. Don't even know where to begin. But, yeah, I really like that you covered all the different aspects of sustainability and also gave us some hope. Yeah, just to not lose time, because I'm sure people have questions. There are two kind of, one clarification question and then more something organizational. So Peter asked if you would be willing to share the slides with the audience afterwards.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Not sure what the best way would be.
I think I have a list of the emails of the people who signed up or participated. So if you just send the deck to me, I can make sure to distribute it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Wonderful. And then a clarification question was regarding the statistics that you mentioned about what the impact is of us wearing clothes for 3 months longer than usual. Do you know what the reference point is? So like what the benchmark is for how long we usually wear our clothes?
Mm-hmm. Now you're asking my memory to work very hard right now. So this came from a study by WRAP, so WRAP, which is an organization in the UK, and they did this report in 2012. So if you look up that report, it should tell you. I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head anymore, since it's been a year since I did my thesis.
All good, but yeah, it's good to know where to look up that information. Thank you. And then this is not a question, but just a comment. So Claudia says she's loving this presentation. And then,
I hope it wasn't too daunting.
No, not at all. I think, yeah, a lot of people are just thanking you for this amazing presentation. And then we have a question by Shahnaz. Does dyeing of organic clothes also pose the same problem?
It depends on which kind of material we're looking at. So I'm not an expert in this, but I've been looking into a little bit of organic cotton versus normal cotton. And the difference between organic cotton versus normal cotton is actually that organic cotton is grown without the pesticides. So that means that growing the cotton uses as much water, and also dyeing it uses a lot of water. And that's also mainly because of the type of synthetic dye that we're using. Because actually back in the day, the word indigo, it came to be because Greek people found this flower in India, and they called the color from this flower indigo. And this was originally used to dye our jeans. But also this flower is very expensive. So rather than using this flower, the industry started to use this synthetic dye. And that dye requires a lot of water to flow through the fabric to create it. So it really depends on what kind of material you're using. But in general, cotton isn't the most sustainable material. Even if it's bio-cotton, it's much better to use hemp, for example, in the case of jeans. But then again, to have that, that very vintage-looking denim look that looks very faded, it's hard to pull that off with hemp. So I think people are still looking for alternatives. That's actually beyond us answering your question. I'm sorry about that, but I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. The next question in the chat is from Mahima. And the question is, are companies at large actually open towards adopting circular economy in their business model? And how can we incentivize circular economy from the economic perspective?
Mm-hmm. So this initiative that I showed you, let me see, go back to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. It's working with 70 leading brands to make this jeans redesign guide possible, and people that are also willing to be a part of the circular economy. And they, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation actually released another report, I think back in 2017, called the New Textiles Economy, that also has a lot of brands just joining in this initiative. And I think part of it is because I believe people are not inherently bad, but also because policy changes are asking for this. So, several cities, Amsterdam, one of them, are already implementing things such as the donut economics. So if you're a business, it's actually very smart to already look into the circular business models, because you don't want to get to a stage where you're forced by policy to adapt this circular business model and then not have all the processes in place, because it takes a lot of effort to understand your whole supply chain, to train your staff, and to rethink your whole system. So I think a lot of brands are just preparing for the worst, because even though it's easier to just do mass fabrication and sell as many clothes as possible with labor abuse and a very cheap price, it's not the most durable thing to do.
Great. Just jumping to the next question in the chat, Lucy is asking, knowing how the current system is, what do you think is better between buying products made from leather, which are often durable but not animal friendly, or buying products made from fake leather, which are often not very eco-friendly and not durable?
Mm-hmm. Depends on what your definition is of sustainability, and also which part of sustainability you care about. So, I mean, sustainability, it can be social impact, so garment workers in those countries. It can be the planet impact, so more like environmental impact, actually. And then there's also the animal welfare part. So if your core reason for believing in sustainability is because of animal welfare, of course you would go for like non-leather, because then you're not killing cows for this. But then if you're thinking about it from an environmental sustainability perspective, then the question is hard to tell. And then you need all these scientists doing something called life cycle assessments, where they actually compare two products and see which one pollutes more. And I can't really answer that, I'm afraid. But I hope that gives you something to think about.
Yeah, and perhaps just to add on to that, there are so many innovative ideas for leather alternatives, and I'm sure it's just like it's a growing market, and perhaps over time we'll see that people come up with more durable alternatives as well.
On that note, there's some very interesting things going on, because I wrote this article once about foods in relation to fashion innovation. And it's freaky how people can turn things into things that look like leather. So there's things called apple leather, pineapple leather, and also algae plastic as well. So I don't know how durable they are in the long run, but obviously they do then biodegrade into the planet in a more natural way. So I think it's up to the scientists again to calculate what's better then.
Yeah. So the next question is from Lucia. She says, thanks for the very informative presentation. Which part of the typical fashion production is the easiest to design in a circular way, in your opinion?
Easiest to design as in easiest to change?
Lucia, if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to clarify.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, easiest to change quickly. I mean, I think many of the parts of the production probably takes more innovation. It takes longer. So I was just wondering, in your opinion, like what would be quite easy to actually implement into the current production system?
Well, the supply chain is notorious for being very tricky, from fiber production to fabric production, because it's so scattered, it's so global. So your pairs of jeans that you bought in the UK might have traveled the whole world before it came to you. And that's the hard thing about being more sustainable in the production phase, because there's a lack of transparency and people actually don't know what's happening in every little part of the supply chain. And that's also why when I thought about circular business models in my thesis, I actually focused on the use phase and making that, tie back into more sustainable practices rather than the supply chain. So I would say it's kind of it kind of affects each other, doesn't it? So when you think about more circular business models in your company and you redesign that, then naturally your production chain will change. But to answer your question, it's a difficult one. I think it starts with the thought of what kind of clothing you're trying to produce. So think about the material that you're using and making your supply chain easier. So not one part in the supply chain per se. It's more like, where do you want the starting point to be, if that answers your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Ben is wondering about the one graph you showed, which stated that the disposal of clothes is having no effect on the environment. And he's saying that he found that surprising, as he thought that disposal, like burning, landfills, etc., must definitely lead to an environmental impact.
Oh, yeah, the 0% that you're seeing here. I think that's what he means, that doesn't have any greenhouse gas emissions. I can't remember how they calculate. So this is from the EcoChain 2019 report, if you want to look that up. But what I'm imagining is that they didn't calculate until that point. So they just assume that you dispose something and then they didn't think about the burning part of things. But you're right, actually, a lot of companies do burn their clothes even before it's used. So actually some companies are under fire right now where they produce so many clothes during collection, and to save their brand, they just burn these clothes even though they've never been sold, never been used. So that these statistics definitely don't tell the whole story, and it always depends on what parameters you're using. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I guess it's a good example for, or a good reminder that it's always good to question the statistics you're looking at. So the next question in the chat is from Paula, who is asking, how can we change our consumption pattern as consumers and be more conscious?
Well, okay, let me go back to the pyramid. Where's my pyramid? So this pyramid is actually a very good way of thinking about things. So the best thing you can always do is at the top of the pyramid to simply refuse buying anything. That's the most sustainable thing to do. In a way, the most simplest, because you don't have to think, it's very straightforward, just don't buy. But it's also psychologically the hardest thing to do because we have our needs and we want to have new clothes sometimes. And in that case, we have to rethink our consumption patterns. And I think that's about finding new ways to fulfill your needs, whether it's need for more pretty clothes or warmer clothes. You can go to thrift shops, you can go to secondhand shops. You can also try these rental subscription models if you're unsure about your fashion style and you don't know what to invest in. So I think it's about choosing your battles and knowing where you're at.
Yeah, and I think it's great to know that there are so many options for us to choose from. The next question in the chat is from Pooja. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Do you think fashion professionals or brands are at all re-educating the consumers for circular fashion through their practices, or are considering to start the practice it?
Well, some brands are trying to educate the consumers, but they kind of border on greenwashing. For example, last weekend, a friend shared an advertisement from H&M where they sold these jeans and they had patches on them saying, this is, if you are keen about sustainability, these are the jeans for you because there are patches on them, without taking into account that the very fact that we are putting patches on our jeans sometimes, it's because things get ripped and then we repair it. And that's the sustainable part of it. Not ripping your jeans during manufacturing and putting more textile on it to make it look sustainable. So I know that H&M is one of the front runners in terms of all the other fast fashion companies. Like, they're doing a lot of great work. But sometimes I'm still questioning their messaging and whether it's greenwashing. So it's hard to tell whether they're actually re-educating or whether they're trying to, I don't know, look better than they are actually doing. But there are also other brands. So when we look at smaller brands, local brands, or brands such as Mud Jeans, like I already highlighted, these are, inherently looking at sustainability from a more holistic perspective. So not just selling more sustainable things, but also cultivating this culture of education, collaboration, of capacity building. So if you go to the Good On You website, they have a whole brand database that tells you about all the brands and how they're doing in terms of animal welfare, social sustainability, environmental sustainability. And I would really recommend that I'm actually going to look it up so I can share it with you.
Yeah, perhaps I guess that is a good resource to look at, because I would have an add-on question to that. Like, how can we as a consumer distinguish between what brands tell us, what effort they're making, and whether that's just greenwashing or not?
Sorry, what was the question? I was distracted because I was sharing the link.
No worries. I think probably the Good On You app is perhaps partly an answer to my question, but perhaps you have other resources or other ways to distinguish whether brands are just telling that they're making a good effort, but are actually just greenwashing, or are really doing something that is that has long-term positive effects.
Mm-hmm. I think, nobody really knows the answer to whether a brand is sustainable or not. It's so difficult to do sustainability right, and that shouldn't really discourage us. I am a firm believer that it's better to have 1,000 people doing sustainability imperfectly than having one person doing it perfectly. So I think if you suspect that the brand is greenwashing, it's about dialogue, isn't it? In an ideal world, you would, sit around a table with a brand and try to discuss this and see what their actual intentions are. But most brands don't really allow you to do that. So you have to talk with your friends about it and question yourself, be very critical about it. When I see Zara or another brand producing some sustainable collection, I look at the amount of clothes that are in the collection, and then I compare it with all the different clothes they have on the website. And if I see that it's only 5 sustainable garments compared to 10,000 not sustainable ones, I think I have an idea of whether a brand is genuinely trying to be sustainable or not. You can say so many things in your mission statement, but it's the actions that count. So I think it's just an ongoing quest of questioning yourself, questioning people, and discussing this with people, because you shouldn't be alone in this, and nobody knows all the answers.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good, helpful answer. Thank you. And I know we're already at the end. There's one open question in the chat. So if you're okay with that, I would just give you that one question before we end. So Carla is saying, thanks for the presentation. It was very informing. Since you talked about fake leather based on plants, what is your opinion on the so-called hybrid leather? So plant-based leathers that also use plastics such as PU and PVC, and sometimes in higher concentration than the plant waste itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the question whether it's better to have something that's biodegradable and sustainable but doesn't last very long, or something that is not biodegradable but lasts forever. And then the question is whether people will use it forever and ever. So that's a hard question, because I know that a lot of plant-based materials use plastics to keep it firm. And sometimes they use recycled plastics for this. And in that case, I do agree with it, because the plastic is already there anyway. What I don't agree with is trying to pump more plastic out of the system just to create so-called sustainable materials. So just to get back to the pyramid, the most sustainable thing to do is always to not buy anything new, and for brands not produce anything new. But that's also a very idealistic view of things. Like, in an ideal world, we will all just stop producing and only buy secondhand and thrift or share clothes or rent clothes, because we already have enough clothes to last us a lifetime as is. There's so many clothes going to landfill because they are not being sold. But that's not something we can expect from businesses that are trying to thrive economically. And I'm not sure what the right answer would be. I guess when plastics do have to be used to firm up the plant-based materials, they should just be recyclable if it's possible, technically speaking.
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of trade-offs involved in the whole field and decisions that we make. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of interesting comments also in the chat. I also saw that there were some resources being shared. So when I'm sending the slides around, perhaps I can also include those resources so that everyone who was on the event can benefit from that. So Cynthia, thank you so much for your presentation and for answering all the questions. I think we really all learned a lot, and I think you're doing great work. So yeah, just thank you for your time. Thank you for your input. And thank you, Thomas, for chairing the event. And thank you for all you that are here and that are interested in this topic. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're having a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you. I just shared some link there for those who want to, follow us. And yeah, feel free to email us if you want to collaborate or volunteer as well or partner up. And thank you for organizing, Lara. I hope it was interesting. And if anyone has more questions, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. I just realized that I misspelled my own name on Zoom. So that's amazing. My name is not Cynthia Ko. My name is Cynthia Ko.
Okay. Yeah, now everyone can see the correct name, I think. Wonderful. Yeah, so I think on this note, we're just closing it off. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.